Good afternoon, welcome to the program. We've just had a briefing about an hour along with the Prime Minister, Chief Medical Officer, and one of the key points to come out of it is the possibility that Australia could eradicate coronavirus on the current trajectory. Let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. Now, Andrew, the PM says they're talking about suppression of the virus. That's their strategy, as opposed to eradication of the virus, which is the New Zealand strategy. But both the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer said it's possible that on our trajectory, doing better than New Zealand anyway in terms of those numbers, that we could get to a point of eradication of COVID-19.
Yeah, certainly. And making that point, Scott Morrison, that we are actually doing better than New Zealand in terms of our health numbers. So that only points to one thing, and that's potential eradication. We know just what small numbers of new cases we are seeing now when we have done a lot of testing, a serious amount of testing by worldwide standards. So who would have dreamt we'd be in this situation just 3 weeks ago, Kieran? And there was a sense there of trying to get back to normality, and in a lot of things slowly. In a month's time, that was the promise that we could see some restrictions go. I notice he's saying Parliament back next month. Earlier it was August, just a week ago, wasn't it? And, you know, the capital A's are on you, Kieran, next time, because you thought it wouldn't be back until August. I said it would be. But let's have a listen to Eliza Edwards' question, if we can, and the PM, showing that eradication's a possibility. He's saying this for the first time.
Why is Australia not trying to eradicate the virus, given our progress has been so strong? And if we're not at the New Zealand end of the scale yet, is it possible we'll get there some point in the near future?
Well, as we observed today, and Professor Murphy will touch on this as well, a byproduct of the approach that we're taking may well be what you say. That could well happen. But the eradication pathway involves an approach which would see even more economic restrictions than are currently in place, and that is not seen to be a wise, in our view.
Now, we know when it comes to this virus, you just can't afford to be definitive. I'm going to show you now, bearing in mind Scott Morrison's talking about lifting some restrictions in a month and kids going back to school in a month, what he said on March 18 about if you put things in place, they have to be in place for 6 months. They were still talking about 6 months there for restrictions overall, but it just goes to show you this crisis isn't black and white, and we've done a lot better than we thought we would. Here's Scott Morrison, March 18.
Please know this. Whatever we do, we've got to do for at least 6 months. 6 months.
So the PM, earlier in the crisis, Australia has exceeded his expectations, I think, in terms of how well we've done in terms of the shutdowns, people listening in terms of social distancing, staying at home over the Easter weekend, which was a big one. And now it comes down to 3 key points, doesn't it, Andrew, as to tracing, tracking, and then controlling any outbreak. And I guess, as one colleague just sent me a message, if downloading that app to trace people means I can get back to the pub sooner, I'm downloading the app.
Well, look, quite frankly, if the colleagues in Canberra, they'd probably be pretty safe at the pub at the moment. I mean, look, I shouldn't say that. I'll get told off by government for saying that, because the one thing they don't want to see is complacency. But there were no new cases in Canberra yesterday. There were only 2 in Queensland. There haven't been any in Northern Territory for days, as the PM said. That's why schools are going back. So, yeah, but he's laid out the framework. He clearly intends to implement that framework. We're told the app is 2 weeks off. He's talking about restrictions off in 4 weeks. So there is a clear pathway there. The encouragement then will be from him for as many people as possible to take up that app. That's a key aspect to it too. But the Army will no doubt be involved, as they are with North West Tasmania on outbreaks. Let's hear what he said, though, about us not getting complacent.
We've stayed ahead of it. We've got to keep ahead of it. We can't allow our patience to wear off. I know it's a very anxious thing for Australians, and when they see the really good results, they go, well, can't we all just go back to how it was? None of us would like that more than any of us here. But let's look to the experience of what's happened overseas. If you ease off too quickly, too early, then you end up making the situation even worse.
The Prime Minister there, and totally appropriate that he is saying, let's not get complacent, because that's the risk here. We've seen it in northwest Tasmania. This thing can spread and spread quickly. So people have still got to keep these measures in place. Bessie, I guess it comes down to two levels. One is you've got the shutdown in terms of us staying at home, not going to restaurants, no pubs, economic activity reduced. But then there's the broader level, which I think is probably a permanent change anyway, Andrew, in the way people operate with hygiene and social distancing.
100%.
I can't see the Australian population getting back to the old approach anytime soon.
And Scott Morrison and the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian have both said this now. He was saying it again today, that social distancing is with us for some time to come, at least until we get a vaccine. Now, he didn't specify what it was, but he said that when restrictions are lifted, it will be on high value, low risk activities. So I think he's spoken about work and school before, important things. Let's have a listen to him talk about that.
When we've got in place the broader testing regime for surveillance, the automated contact tracing regime in place, and we've scaled up our capacity to respond to outbreaks, that's what we're looking to do in the next 4 weeks. Build that up. And then what the states and territories and ourselves are working on are what you'd call high-value, low-risk economic activities that we will be able to start to open up more of.
Now, on the schools front, Andrew, there's been a lot made of the differences here, but this, to me, is totally understandable between the states and the federal government. You've got not only different school systems, not only different systems within states and timetables and schedules, but we've also got different numbers of COVID-19 cases. So the suggestion that there should be one coherent, simple message, I think is probably a bit naive. When you look at our federation, you're going to have states react differently. And I think what the PM and the state leaders have tried to do today with that broader principle statement is to give some sense of cohesion. But the fact is, at the state or territory level, governments are going to be moving at their own timetable.
Yeah, well, it's easier to do a Facebook message saying all kids should be in school, as the PM's done, than it is to actually solve the thing, frankly, Kieran. But you're right about different states. I mean, they're the ones who are going to get blamed if there's an outbreak, if they open up. But having said that, the evidence is children don't get it to the same extent. And the other aspect, teachers' unions are more militant in some jurisdictions than others. And the last thing they want is a teachers' strike, because that complicates things even further. Having said that, I think the majority of Australians would want children back at school, particularly with the health numbers where they are. And then on top of that, you've got the independent schools as well. So the public schools can go back, and the independent schools, they're worried about their teachers, workforce, etc. They say, we want to keep doing online learning. And Scott Morrison sounded a bit irritated at his girls' private school at one stage there. One benefit, if states do different things here, Kieran, is that we might be able to see or prove, in fact, that opening schools has no effect on the number of cases. Because let's say New South Wales opens up and Victoria doesn't, and bear in mind they're there now for children if they absolutely have to be there. But let's say New South Wales opens them up much more and Victoria doesn't, and we see no difference in the increasing cases, then that will be proof for Victoria that they should open them up. But why shouldn't they be open in WA when they've only got one new local case in the last day? Or in the ACT, 0 cases, or in Queensland, 2 cases. It's really more of a New South Wales-Victoria issue going ahead. What's really confusing about the New South Wales situation is Gladys Berejiklian saying we're going to open it up to more students, but not all students. Now, how in the heck does that work? And how hard is it going to be for teachers to teach half the students at school and half online? So there's a long way to go in this saga, and it sounds like National Cabinet's not going to solve it. And Scott Morrison's resigned to that in the sense that he's finally said, well, really, it's up to the states.
And I think we've got the Prime Minister on those broader rules for teachers. Have a look.
We need to have proper arrangements in place for teachers and other staff in schools, obviously to protect their work environment. But at the same time, that doesn't lead to the same rules applying for students because they have a different level of risk.
So the Prime Minister and you know, in terms of that motherhood series of statements with states and the federal government, a lot of it, you know, is obvious, but I think what will be interesting, Andrew, is to see what the health experts' advice is to schools, because they've got explicit advice to teachers now and principals and schools generally in terms of how they should be delivering their classes. And I look forward to, as I'm sure many principals and teachers around the country are looking forward to reading that in detail. Yeah,
and if you want to see that, it should be posted, well, this evening, the Prime Minister says, health.gov.au, the AHPPC advice. It'll say it's safe for children to go to schools. It'll say, I imagine, that there need to be certain policies put in place in schools around enough hand sanitizer, smaller classrooms maybe,
temperature checks.
Temperature checks. That's an optional in New South Wales they're looking at. I think that's important. And teachers not congregating in the staff room. And all important, because it was mentioned there from Scott Morrison, he said he agreed with Daniel Andrews on it, is this scenario where school drop-off parents don't mix. That seems to be key in it. Yeah. You know, there's just... Northern Territory's got an easy situation. No new cases. They just send the kids back. That's the simplest state. Matt Cunningham and co there have the easiest situation. It's a lot harder for the rest of us, but hopefully it'll sort itself out next couple of months. Although Scott Morrison even said yesterday, Kieran, he doesn't see while COVID-19 is going on that it will be mandatory to send your kids to school. And of course, you've got immunosuppressed kids and parents and that complication as well.